biggest cases that we're covering, and we have two big ones today. We're going to talk about the death of Gannon Stauch, and a little bit later on, the latest with our friend Joe Exotic. He did an interview from prison, so there's a lot to break down there in that case. But first up, I want to bring in my guest for today. Joining me, our law and crime legal analyst, Bob Bianchi, and legal journalist, Molly Vygotsky, who's been following both of these cases. So it's great to have both of my guests here. But also we have with us executive trial producer, Kathy Russin. Kathy is going to be fielding your questions about these cases. So if you have any question, write us, we'll talk about it, and we'll break it down. Now, Molly, I want to get to you. I want to start talking right now about the Gannon Stauch case. Again, this is an 11-year-old boy from Colorado who went missing, or he was first reported missing on January 27th. 2 months later, his body is found all the way in Florida. His stepmother, Letitia Stauch, is arrested and charged with murder, child abuse, and also tampering with evidence. And now we are learning more details from the arrest affidavit, some disturbing details. So, Molly, I guess the question is, after all this new evidence coming forward, why are authorities charging Letitia? What do they have against her?
They have a very solid case just based on reading that arrest affidavit, Jesse. They have a ton of evidence, blood evidence. They did the luminol test in his basement bedroom of the home on Colorado. And based on that affidavit, authorities believe that she killed him the same day that he was reported missing. She called into his school, said the fifth grader wasn't coming in that day, and based on some of the evidence that they found, his usage of electronics in the home, they believe he was alive earlier in the day. And I tell you, it is heartbreaking when you read that affidavit and you see where his dad is texting him and when he stops basically replying to his father. So they have a ton of evidence. They had the blood evidence that they believe that he was seriously injured in the bedroom. They also have video from a neighbor across the street, which contradicts statements. He has surveillance video that shows Letitia and the son, her stepson, getting into a truck, leaving. The video shows them both coming back. She had told the neighbors that he had gone to visit a friend. And in fact, that's something else the affidavit gets into. She changes her story multiple times to authorities, almost as when a new story occurs to her and she changes it again. They also had GPS data tracking her movements through her cell phone as well as her vehicle. And also they had a security system within the home that tracked how many times the door opened to his bedroom. So it shows a lot of activity in his bedroom that afternoon, along with compared to other days when there wasn't that much activity. So basically, every step of the way, they've managed to contradict a lot of her stories. They also believe that she hid his little body in the back of her SUV and left it at the airport when she went to pick up her husband, Gannon's father, Albert, and he basically was off on a U.S. National Guard tour for a couple of days. She went to the airport to pick him up in a rented vehicle while Lee gave him some excuse as to why she didn't have her regular car there. And authorities believe his little body was in the back of that. And she later came back to the airport after taking her husband home in the rental car, and then got that vehicle. And they believe that she dumped him in an area in the Colorado area. Now, how he ended up here in our neck of the woods in Northwest Florida, I live in the very same county where this little boy was found. In fact, I shared an article from your page the day that his body was found. And it's a busy highway in the morning and in the evening for commuters. But basically, law enforcement gave me some details that I should not necessarily make public just yet, but that they had so much evidence on her. They'd already charged her with murder before this little guy's body was found. And then based on what they did find, he was pretty much decomposed, and they are waiting for sure to identify him with DNA, but they are all but certain that she killed him, and that this is a result of the motive is what's so crazy. Why would she do something like this? And that doesn't indicate.
Well, I want to get into that, but Bob, I want to jump out because, Bob, here's the thing. What we just heard from Molly is a very thorough case against this woman. So my question to you is, what are the steps in defending her? Remember, she was the stepmother. She was the person there to care for this young man. And as we'll get into maybe a little bit later, the different stories that she came up with. But how would you go about defending her?
Well, Jesse, like any case, I mean, it depends on the quality of the evidence. Molly laid out a lot of significant evidence in favor of the prosecution. Having been a homicide prosecutor myself, it's certainly the kind of case I'd rather be on that side. but now doing criminal defense work, what you do is you look at all of it and you try to instruct the jury that it's the government's job to prove the case to 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. And whether or not, when you're testing that evidence, motive is something you go to. What is the motive? Why would this happen, ladies and gentlemen of the jury? Try to create some doubt. And like I've said many times before on the network, Jesse, a lot of times as a criminal defense attorney, you're trying the case to one juror and one juror only, hoping that one person says, I just can't find beyond a reasonable doubt, creating a mistrial or a hung jury. And that's basically the way a defense attorney would be looking at this case right now until you have an opportunity to look at the box of all the files and all the evidence to see how bad it is. Secondly, Jesse, very important, where a lot of people make a mistake and don't understand what criminal defense lawyers do. If it's really, really bad and the evidence is really, really overwhelming, you go into mitigation mode. In other words, you try to convince the prosecutor, look, let's work out a reasonable plea offer in the case. You take some zip off the fastball, we'll give you something. It avoids a trial, it avoids emotional trauma to the family, and hopefully the defense attorney can work something out where she'll see the light of day. But lastly, as a prosecutor, whenever I had a homicide case involving a child, especially one in the care and custody of a guardian, no bueno in my mind. And there was the plea offers that I used to offer were plead to murder and take your chances at sentencing. No deals.
Well, clearly at this point, we all have a lot of questions about what's happening. So I want to get to some of your questions. Kathy, what do we have? What are people asking about this case? Because it's developing week by week, month by month. So what are some of the questions we're getting from our viewers right now?
We have a great question from a viewer who wants to know, which state will she be charged in? Florida, Colorado? Will this be a federal case?
Yep.
Okay, that's a great question. Bob, I'm going to take it to you. Where would she be charged, and how is this going to ultimately go forward? Because let's not forget, she was actually extradited from South Carolina because she was there back to Colorado. So which state is going to have jurisdiction here?
The state that's going to take jurisdiction is the one where they're going to make the argument that was where the murder occurred. Boy, this reminds me of the McStay family murder case. Same kind of issues that we covered extensively at the Law and Crime Network. But there's also a possibility that the feds may take the case. They have been involved in it. And if there are any legal issues within that state as to is it going to be a problem? Do we need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it actually happened here? You may see the jurisdictions get together, the state prosecutors and the federal prosecutors, and then make a decision. What gives us the bigger bang for our buck? What jurisdiction is better where we can most likely secure a conviction? And that conversation is going on right now, I'm assured.
Molly, I want to turn to you. There's a question that keeps coming up about the different versions of her story. You mentioned it before. I counted maybe 3 different versions. What are the different versions that Letitia has given about what happened to Gannon?
There's some strange stories here. The initial story was that she reported him missing, that he had gone on foot to walk to a friend's house, but that she didn't see him. He'd never come home. And she also said that she didn't even try to contact any friends or neighbors. That's something that came out in the affidavit. So that was the first story. When police get there, she changed it up again. She said that he had been out riding his bike, he hit his head, and then somebody randomly came up and abducted him and kidnapped him. So suddenly it became, he wasn't just missing, he was kidnapped. And then she changed it yet again when she said that, yes, he was home. There had been, and I want to say it was a construction worker, but it was some person that she claimed that she had met outside of the home who had followed her home, came inside their home, raped her, held a gun to Gannon's head, and then asked for a suitcase. So these are just some odd details that she gave in her statement that, you know, as a reporter, I'd like to read into that a little bit and think maybe these are things that she did to him herself. Not to think like a prosecutor, but it certainly seems, why would she mention a gun? Why would she mention a suitcase? And they haven't released cause of death officially yet in this child's murder, but they do believe that she murdered him and that she dumped his body here in Northwest Florida. How it got from, and that's another change in the story, you know, how it got from Colorado to Florida is still up in the air. When she actually arrived in South Carolina, where she and Gannon's family are basically originally from. I tracked down some stories from coworkers of hers. She had tried to apply for a job as a school teacher. She was hired, didn't show up. She'd also, I think, waited tables a little bit. One of the coworkers there said she had been essentially bragging that she saved her husband from a failing marriage. And that's why I'm still digging into that personal relationship between Letitia and her husband. But it sounds as though they hadn't been married too long. Gannon's parents both shared custody of him and his younger sister. And that is something else that was tragic that came out in the affidavit. The sister, I think she's 9, she came home from school that afternoon, and Letitia, according to the affidavit, sent her outside almost immediately to go ride around in the street on her bike. So they believe it's because at that time she was cleaning up evidence of killing Gannon. She also has a daughter that's hers by a different relationship who's, I think, 17 or 18. Prosecutors, police have said that she was at work all day, but she texted her and said, hey, when you come home, will you stop off and get some baking soda? Will you get some trash bags? And other items that basically police believe she was using to hide her crime. So those are just some of the stories that she changed.
I mean, and that's why, as you said, the case against her is so strong at this point, the evidence mounting against her. Again, if you're just joining us, I want to let you know this is Law and Crime Network Live. We're taking your questions about the Gannon Stauch case. We're also going to talk about the Joe Exotic case in a minute, but we're breaking down what we've learned so far. I'm here with Molly Vygotsky as well as Bob Bianchi and also Kathy Russin. So, Kathy, we're getting questions about this trial, or excuse me, about the case. It hasn't even gone to trial yet. What are some other questions that we've gotten from our viewers? We're taking all of your viewer questions right now.
Yes, everyone is so interested in this case. Okay, we have a question. Who are the possible witnesses in this case? Who would be possible witnesses they could call?
All right, so that's a good question. Who are the possible witnesses in this case? Molly, I'm going to start with you, and then I would like to talk with Bob about some potential strategies here. So, Molly, who are potential witnesses?
It would probably be the neighbor across the street whose surveillance video they had that picked up her taking Gannon off in the truck and then bringing him back, although from what I read, it's not as clear. That some people thought they couldn't see the boy get out of the truck, but police believe he was there and he did get out of the truck. So that would be one witness who could say, hey, she may have told police one thing, but my surveillance video shows that her behavior and his behavior was this that day at that time when she said something else different had occurred. Now, police did point out that there was no one else in the home but the two of them. So it looks like technology, surveillance, is going to end up being a digital witness, if you will, just all the activity, monitoring their movements, monitoring her movements. Outside of that, just based on the affidavit, I'm not sure who else would be a witness.
Well, I'll tell you what, Bob, I want to go to you. Wouldn't some of the investigators who interviewed her be witnesses? Because one of the odd details, and you tell me if this is odd, Bob, that she apparently brought notes with her to her police interview. Is that strange? Is that rare? Does that happen? Does that give you an indication about anything? Why would this woman bring notes with her to a police interview?
This ties into a question you asked me before, Jesse, about how you defend the case. But let me talk to you a little bit about how you investigate a homicide case as a prosecutor. You have to be thinking at every juncture about what the defense is going to be arguing. So you're prophylactically, if you're doing it right, thinking of all the defenses. Now, there are multiple conflicting statements here. She's bringing notes with her, which is very odd. Clearly, she's telling wildly different stories, but here's what I'm concerned about as a prosecutor and maybe exploited tactically as a defense lawyer. The one is the motive. And the second thing is they may have a great digital record that she was somehow involved, maybe with the disposal of the body or the cleanup, but that doesn't necessarily mean she's the one that did it. And I can only say in my experience, we know as prosecutors and investigators that people sometimes lie and give wild stories because they may be covering up either for somebody else or they don't want something that's embarrassing to come out. Now, I'm not saying that's happened here, but I'm hoping that these detectives and these prosecutors were very detailed in making sure that they not only show evidence of guilt towards her, but they've also excluded evidence with respect to any other individual that may have been involved. Many times, we've seen this on the show, Jesse, they stop at the arrest. And like I used to always tell my staff, it's not till it gets through the goal line and successful through appeal that we have a winnable case. So don't stop now. Exclude all others. Very important fact.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, let's try to get one more question about the Gannon Stauch case. And see what our viewers are asking about, because there are many questions about what happened here.
Okay, not sure if we've talked about this yet, since I'm trying to also read the questions, but what do we know about Gannon's father?
Yeah, I mean, Molly, you talked a little bit about Gannon's father and his reaction. I mean, what has his reaction been to what has transpired here, and what do we know about his relationship with Letitia?
You know, that's a great question. And I was trying to dig into his background a little bit more. I'm not even sure what he does for a living when he's not spending time with the National Guard. But it, again, the what I have read about him is that they all come from the Myrtle Beach, South Carolina area. He filed for divorce against her within days of her arrest. So I think it's pretty clear that that marriage is over. I don't know how long it had been going on, but again, based on that other interview that a local South Carolina station did with a coworker of hers, they believe that sounds as though, based on that conversation, that perhaps they were sorry about that. This is the beauty of doing things online at home. There's a phone ringing, but that'll stop soon.
No worries, no worries. It's okay. It's okay. That's totally fine, because we're getting more of a sense of it. I wanted to talk more about this case, and I know that she has a status hearing on April 14th. Possibly she'll enter a plea at that time, and maybe a little bit later on a different day, we'll get a chance to talk more about this case. But while we do have a few more minutes, I want to get more into now and switch gears into Joe Exotic. We've been following the drama surrounding the Tiger King Netflix documentary. If you haven't watched it, highly recommend it. Never seen anything quite like it. And every day there's a new development. Joe Exotic, the star of the show, the man who was ultimately convicted of trying to hire someone to kill his rival, currently serving a 22-year prison sentence. He answered a few questions in prison. This was earlier on in March last month. He was interviewed by Netflix. Here's a short, little small glimpse of some of the things he had to say in his interview in prison.
It would be nice if I could actually see me being famous out there, but I've seen these same four walls for a year and a half now. Go sit in a cage with your animal for a week. I mean, when I left the zoo and I sent my chimpanzees to the sanctuary in Florida, and imagine what my chimpanzees went through for 18 years, I'm ashamed of myself.
All right, so that's a little bit of Joe Exotic. Clearly likes this fame. Even if you watch the documentary, you heard so much about how he loves, or his goal was always to be famous. And this is an interesting scenario because he is becoming famous even while he is in prison after being convicted of some pretty serious crimes. Bob, I want to go to you. Given everything you've seen with this new attention to the documentary, him giving interviews from prison, I know that he is eligible for parole in 2034. The likelihood he'd get out earlier than that?
No. This guy is like a prosecutor's dream and a defense lawyer's nightmare, because he is so narcissistic, giving these interviews, talking about not his fame, but his infamy, I'd rather call it. And all this telegraphs to parole people and to judges is that this guy is a significant risk. He's got no insight into his conduct. And one of the major factors that they look before they get paroled or put on supervised release, as it were, is whether or not the person has insight into their character and are willing to live a law-abiding life. All this guy's basically saying is, I feel bad for my chimpanzees because I put them in a cage and now I'm in a cage and I can't wait to go out to see my infamy. These are not good comments for him, and I'm sure his lawyers are like, it's a joke, but taking a Xanax and drinking a martini, because every time this guy speaks, he's putting himself in a box.
Well, let's not forget he did. He's representing himself in this new civil lawsuit he's filing against different organizations and people, and he did testify in his own defense. So is he his own best advocate? Maybe we'll get into that in a second. Kathy, I know our viewers have a lot of opinions on Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin and the Tiger King documentary. So what are some questions that we have for the latest with Joe Exotic?
Well, first, in homage to this documentary, I'm wearing my animal print today, because quite frankly, I've never seen anything as crazy as this case. Okay. Viewer wants to know, what has Carol Baskin's reaction been to this documentary?
Molly, that's a good question. What has Carol Baskin been saying about everything that's transpired? Because she really is, or transpired, she really is another central focus of this whole saga.
I tell you what, it's funny. If you want to know what she thinks, go to her website, Big Cats. I mean, I checked it out this morning, and full disclosure, I actually visited that place like 20 years ago, and I have family in the Tampa area, and it's one of those things you do as a touristy deal. It's like a forcible $20 a head, at least it was like 20 years ago. But looking at our website now, it's basically saying we're closed because of COVID, but we still need your help. Please, no hateful comments. All the attention that's been brought about to us on the Tiger King. We think it's going to actually improve our cause, which is to keep people from owning big cats, to give them more freedom, so that to stop this abuse. So the spin is that she's doing it right, they're doing it wrong. She wants to ride this wave of attention to show basically that we can do more to help animals. And Congress actually is responding, not necessarily to her, but they are doing the same thing. They feel like this whole documentary has brought to light some real advocacy issues that could potentially give them some help in getting different laws passed to protect animals and keep people from owning them at all. Now, I think that the documentary makers are actually planning to do another spinoff just on her. She's got the husband that turned up missing, the millionaire, and there's the parts of the documentary where people are saying that she fed him to the cats, and there he is, and she's a character. I mean, all these people are characters. And the one thing that kept going through my mind when I'm looking at these three different folks that run these cat farms is that it's predators running predators. I mean, they all seem predatory in their own different way. They each have a different sales spin, but they all seem a little narcissistic. They all seem like they want to control their environment.
Well, there's a reason that we were all captivated for 7 episodes and maybe now a future 8th episode. Bob, 10 seconds, really quick. People are saying 22 years was excessive. Do you agree?
A person tried to kill somebody and it tried with multiple people, including an FBI agent. No, it is not an excessive sentence because, but for the fact that it didn't occur, somebody could have died, and the government and the judge needs to send a strong message about that.
Well, they certainly did, but the saga of Joe Exotic will not end here. The conversation will continue, and we'll be here to cover it. Bob, Molly, Kathy, our viewers, thanks so much for joining us today. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, on YouTube as well. Thanks for joining us. Everyone have a great day and stay safe.